Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the National Bleav Network. And joining me to give a little insight to newest Texan wide receiver Christian Kirk is co-host of the Touchdown Jaguars podcast, James Johnson. Pleasure to have you on, James. And what was your reaction just from a Jags angle on the Christian Kirk trade?
Yeah, I was a little shocked because the news was at first that they were just going to release him. We have seen this in the past, though, especially in the Trent Baalke era, although this is a new regime, which we'll talk about that probably, I'm sure. But we have seen where, it looks like a player's getting released, and then next thing you know, hey, a team called, maybe last minute, whatever the case may be, and made us an offer. And now, instead of just releasing them, we're sending them to the Texans. I was shocked, as I mentioned to you beforehand, that they were doing a deal with the Texans. But nonetheless, man, it's still a situation where it makes a lot of sense for both teams. From the Texans' perspective, it makes sense from, when you evaluate the roster, Tank Dell in that situation, right? I think I just read earlier this week that he's going to have ACL surgery. So he didn't have that process taken care of initially, which, that could be procedural thing or whatever the case may be. So
it's not his first surgery, and we expect him to be basically out for next year, and hopefully his career is not ending. So yeah, the Texans were desperate, just from their perspective.
Right. And why not, if you're the Texans, go to a place you're familiar with? They've got plenty of film on Christian Kirk, right, through their games against us. So from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And I just hope this one doesn't bite us in the behind, right, so to speak, because while Deshaun, I almost said the wrong quarterback there, while C.J. Stroud is somebody who struggled a little bit last year, he kind of declined a tad bit last year. He's still very talented. And with a talent like Kirk, I think they can make some good things happen for that offense.
What are the Texans getting with Christian Kirk? What are his strengths? We'll start off with that.
Yeah, they're getting somebody who flourished against, man coverage in the slot a lot. It was a lot of times where they did double move type of concepts out of the slot. He'd get open. The one that stands out to me the most was, I'll never forget it, it was the Saints game when we played the Saints about 2 years ago. And I think it was, I forgot who the slot player was. I'm blanking. I think it was maybe Tyrann Mathieu beat him on a one-on-one with a double move. And Christian Kirk was off for the races. So, a guy that could get you a lot of yards after the catch, because it wasn't a real deep concept that he caught. Got some yardage after the catch and just took it home, man. I think that was a Thursday night game. That's why I remember it like that. But they're also getting a good leader, a guy who, he obviously has ties to Texas because he went to A&M. So, it's a place he's somewhat familiar with. That's pretty much it, man. A guy that's going to work hard with your quarterback. Him and Trevor Lawrence were real close, right? I wouldn't doubt that he would do the same and be the same with C.J. Stroud as well. He's going to be somebody who puts in the work with Stroud day and night. He'll probably link up with Stroud in the offseason, and they'll put in some work that was, something him and Trevor were notorious for, was working during the offseason and just gathering the whole receiving core and passing game as in general. Like, they were kind of big on doing that and working out together. So you guys are getting the total package, man. It's just, after the injury, you have to wonder, like, does he come back full speed? I know it was an upper body injury, not like pertaining to his legs or anything, but does he come back full speed? Does he look like Christian Kirk of old? And if he does, this is one that could turn out very well for the Texans and not so much for the Jaguars.
Yeah, and I want to get to the injuries in a little bit later and get into more detail, but just from a standpoint of his weaknesses, what do you see his weaknesses are? I understand maybe not the best hands in the world. Is that something that you would consider a weakness?
The drops did concern me. Now it was one where, I think our fan base was a little too harsh on him, where he dropped one, albeit, it was in, a pivotal moment of the season for us, at least. It was in the first game of the year, which that game would have been a tone-setting game for us. And, when you're coming from where the Jaguars were coming from, they really needed to beat Miami week 1. But he had a drop where a lot of people were a little too hard on him here, where, like, I think what it was is, how Miami has the the overhang, and the ball basically went from, he was in the area of the field where basically the sun hit him right in the eyes as the ball was coming to him. But it was some other drops that's concerning, like it was looking like at times he was fighting the ball, which, mechanically you don't like to see that. And, he's a receiver who, if that's the case, like he's veteran savvy enough to correct those things like that. But yeah, definitely the hands were concerning. And I think a lot of people here in Jacksonville, they love Christian Kirk. And, a lot of the reaction when he left was for the most part positive, that we'll miss him. But I think at the same time, the Jaguars fans, especially, coming from his position, we're ready to stop being around the top of the league and drop passes. So that, that could be a key reason why he's no longer here for sure.
I noticed his yards per game dropped down to 47.4 yards this past year after being over 65 his first couple of years in Jacksonville. Is there anything that accounts for that? What happened there?
Yeah, admittedly, I think, Trevor struggled at times in the beginning of the season, so that didn't help. I never have been a fan, especially under Doug Peterson and Press Taylor, never was a fan of the offensive line. Like, I don't think our offensive line has been that great. And, it was admittedly, it was a Trent Baalke built line. So I guess it don't all fall on Doug and Press Taylor. I do think like a lot of it was attributed to a slow start from the offense, and the offense trying to like find themselves and trying to come off of what was a losing streak the previous year. And they really were struggling with that and scripting early in games and getting going early in games. And I think like that hurt Kirk's stats a lot is, I think like he was at his best probably, in my opinion, when they started off hot. And that was something they routinely struggle with offensively here these last few years or so.
Did you feel like the Jags could have gotten more out of Christian Kirk? Did Trevor Lawrence get the most out of him? That offense, did they get the most out of Christian Kirk?
Now, the year they went to the playoffs, certainly, yes. But as of last year, no, I don't think they got the most out of him. A lot of it was attributed to, just the offense sputtering, last year as well. But last year, not so much. That's not to say, and I would say before the injury, especially, I think, he had a few good years left in him. Again, it's an upper body injury, not a lower body injury. I think, coming to Houston, that he should be fine. And I think like that, as I was saying, like I was expecting him to blow up last year, minus the injury. Then the injury happened. I wouldn't be shocked if, he picked up where I thought he would pick up off last year with the Texans. Again, just granted the injury, don't really affect his range of like arm motion, his upper body range or whatever, which I don't think it should. We haven't heard anything about like, him having setbacks or anything like that. Yeah, that's what I would say there.
The Jags played him a lot more in the slot last season than outside, 82% of the time. Of the wide receivers who had 40 or more targets from the slot, his depth of target was 13 and a half yards, which was second in the NFL. So he gets downfield. Do you think the slot, James, is his ideal spot?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Getting somebody that can pick up where young Tank Dell left off. As you said, he's dealing with his situation. He'll be back, hopefully full speed. Wish him a speedy recovery. But yes, yeah, he is a deadly slot option. He flourished with double moves. I don't know, like I know you all fired Bobby Slowick, right? So I don't know like what the new offensive coordinator kind of likes to do there. But I wouldn't be shocked if, they like to see him in a lot of double move situations there, yardage after the catch, even though you mentioned he does get good depth. He's good after the catch as well. Like that's one of the things that, that'll always stand out about him is he would catch the ball at times not so deep and make something out of nothing, here in Jacksonville. So, yeah, he's definitely a player you guys should be excited about in terms of what he can do in the slot, even though, again, I know y'all moving on to a new offensive coordinator.
Yeah, and new offensive coordinator that loves guys in the slot. He was in New England for a few years. Of course, we know what they used to do with Brady there. And then he's been over with the Rams and Sean McVay. I want to ask you a little bit more about the injury in a second. But before we roll on, I just want to remind our listeners and fans, I want your reaction. What do you guys think of Christian Kirk and the trade? What other moves should the Texans make this week in free agency? Let me know in the comments. And if you missed it earlier this week, Locked On Astros host Brett Chansey joined me to talk about burning spring training questions. You can support us and get updates on the content by subscribing on YouTube. We consistently put out some content every single week, weekly for almost 12 years now. Give us a thumbs up too and listen in your car or while you're out and about with your favorite podcast app. All right, James, I want to get back to the injury for a sec. Christian Kirk, he's missed 14 games the last 2 seasons. 2 years ago, a groin injury, which those soft tissue injuries, they can be a little bit concerning. Last year, a broken collarbone. I assume, if everything goes okay, I mean, that shouldn't affect much about him like you were talking about. How concerned should Texans fans be about the injury history? The first year he was with the Jags, he played all 17 games. Some little stuff, I guess, in his Cardinal days, but how concerned should they be?
With receivers, this is a personal belief. The older they get and the closer to 30 they get, people should definitely be mindful of soft tissue injuries, right? Because they linger when you're pushing 30, they linger a little bit longer, as opposed to when you're younger. And then, it's been occasions where we've seen receivers at that age range where they'll get a soft tissue injury, and then sometimes they'll get another one or they'll re-aggravate it. Granted, that was, some time ago. What I said all of that to say this is, when you're dealing with soft tissue injuries with a receiver that's pushing 30, it's something to be mindful of, because it can linger a little bit more, in my opinion, than it would with a younger receiver, especially with, receivers and how much they use their legs and they put stress on their lower body. And the older you get, some receivers put a little bit more stress on that part of their body because they're trying to overcompensate for something they're losing, and that's diminishing. So it would be something worth watching. Now, the upper body injury, the shoulder injury, I think, again, as I was saying, I think he should be fine. Typically receivers come back with no issues from that, and they have that upper body range of motion. So I don't think that one will be an issue. But yeah, I guess ultimately time will tell. I'm very cautious with receivers that are around that age range when it comes to injuries and, monitoring them. But with Houston, I think he'll be okay for the most part.
Yeah. Texans have had some injuries with their wide receivers. That's why I think about it first, because, Nico's had some games where he's missed the last few years. Stephon Diggs missed the last half of last year. So it just hasn't worked out real well for the Texans there. You guys, it wasn't just Christian Kirk that you moved on from. The Jags released tight end Evan Ingram, wide receiver David Duvernay, cornerback Ronald Darby. Maybe I missed a couple more guys. How do you feel about those moves?
I totally understand it. When you have a regime change, right? And we've had many of them, we would know. Typically, they do start with impactful moves like that, and multiple moves like that. And a lot of these people are people from the free agency class as soon as last year, right? That Trent Baalke brought to Jacksonville. And I think me and you have had this discussion before in the past, where I wasn't the biggest fan of Trent Baalke and his team building abilities. And I can see why another GM wouldn't be. Right. And especially a younger GM who is more in the new school range. We all have heard the jokes about his age and, him being 34, James Gladstone, he's my age. So he's like, well, I'm a little older than him by a year or two. But for a GM, that is pretty young. Right. But that being said, I'm not shocked, especially, a lot of people look at the Evan Ingram one, right? For example, that one did not shock me, even though I was on record for saying I would keep Ingram. But that one doesn't shock me, because you look at Liam Coen's history, you look at James Gladstone history, they like tight ends who are on the field closer to that 90% area in terms of offensive snaps. And with Evan Ingram, you're limited what you get in terms of if he's blocking. So that being said, you look at what's on the roster after Evan Ingram, and you have a guy like Brenton Strange, who is, that's what he was known for in college, is both blocking and his ability as a pass catcher, but more so as on the blocking end. And I can see why James Gladstone would fall in love with an option like him, who's much cheaper, by the way, that saves you money. But a guy like Brenton Strange, who made a lot of money for himself blocking at Penn State, and also he's taking the steps year by year in the NFL as a pass catcher. So they see an ascending player there, where it might not be easy to replace Evan Ingram, but they have certainly a guy that fits them more like a shoe in Brenton Strange.
Well, you talked a little bit about the front office changes there. And like the Texans with Nick Caley, the Jags used their big offseason moves to go after guys with experience at the Los Angeles Rams. And head coach Liam Coen, an OC under McVay 3 years ago, and GM James Gladstone comes from their front office as well. What do you think overall of the hires? What's the temperature there in Jacksonville about it? Is there optimism now?
Oh, certainly. the moment that, whoever your favorite insider is, Ian Rappaport or Adam Schefter or Mike Garafolo, the moment they put that tweet out that, Trent Baalke was gone, and, you never wish ill on the person who's feeding their family, through their job. But Trent will be just fine. Trent made a lot of money with us. But the moment that tweet went out that that he was gone, like, it was a sense of relief because we knew, and especially, the fan base knew that taking a half measure, which a half measure is changing the coach but not the GM, wasn't going to result in a good thing because it was going to always end like it always ends with Trent Baalke, with the power struggle, right, between the coach and him. Trent Baalke's roster building, as I mentioned earlier, just nobody was really a big fan of it. So when that announcement was made, albeit, Shad Khan did it late, but, we'll take it's better late than never, as the old saying goes. There was a relief. And then, for them to go to, a lot of people will critique it, which I mentioned earlier, about them going to a younger option, way younger option, the youngest GM in the league. And I think in history, he might be the second youngest GM to ever hold a title. I have to check my facts on that. I think Barry from the Browns was 32 when he got his job, if I'm not mistaken. But for them to go to a younger option, a lot of Jags fans are looking at it this way, while the rest of the league and others might be like, that whole staff is a little young. Jags fans are looking at it like, well, we've tried the route of older veteran coaches, and we've tried the route of older veteran GMs that had already been somewhere previously. And then even before that, Tom Coughlin, right? Tom Coughlin as the EVP did not work out well because he didn't gel well with younger players. So from the perspective of the fans, we love it because, we needed to try something fresh, something new, something innovative. And Shad Khan even said that before hiring Gladstone. And I think a lot of people are excited about the youth movement because it's something we haven't had in a while. Now, going back to before Coughlin, they did have Dave Caldwell, who was a younger GM. The few of the fan base that is concerned, that's why they're concerned, because the Dave Caldwell era did not go all that great, aside from, that magical run when they made the Saxonville, defense and all of that. But this is much different than when Dave Caldwell was there. The roster was bare when Dave Caldwell built it. James Gladstone has inherited a roster with almost pretty much many of the premium positions fixed. We would think quarterbacks probably fixed. The edge rushing positions are fixed with Walker and Josh Allen. And they have arguably a top 10 wide receiver. That's another position, premium position that's fixed. Really, all James Gladstone and Liam Coen really need to fix is the secondary, of course, but more so in the trenches. We just got to get better in the trenches, which is way much easier than fixing a lot of premium positions like the GMs of the past have had to do.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what they do with all that stuff, especially Trevor Lawrence. I'm interested to see how things change there. If we could see a little bit better Trevor Lawrence. But we got to talk down the road for sure with you guys. Just love the show over there. He's at sportsgrind_Don on X, the podcast Touchdown Jaguars. Anything else we can plug for you, James?
You got it. You got it to the T. We appreciate you always, Robert, having us on. And sorry, my LED light went out here, and that's why it got a little dark here. But apparently my little LED light here went out. But yeah, no, we appreciate you having us on. One more thing I could plug is the website. We'll get articles on there soon. It's touchdownjaguars.com. Been a while since we posted articles, but with free agency coming up, with visits, draft visits coming up, we'll get some more content up on there as well. And of course, draft content, as me and Phil, we typically go to the Jaguars facility to cover the draft as well.
Yeah, you and Phil do a great job over there, and can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking the time. It's a huge deal in Houston, of course. Thanks so much for doing this.
Absolutely. No problem, Robert. And thanks for having me.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.